Hey guys, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the names and the formulas of covalent compounds. Now, so far we've learned how to name and identify the formulas of ionic compounds, and today we're going to finish up by talking about how to figure out the names and formulas of covalent compounds. Now, just a reminder, because we already did this in our last lesson, but just a refresher, covalent compounds are formed between two nonmetals. So those elements that are on the right-hand side of the periodic table. They do not involve ions, so they can combine in various ratios. So they're not necessarily dependent on the charge. So when we figured out the formulas of our ionic compounds, that depended on the charge of the ions because the whole thing had to equal out to be neutral. But with our covalent compounds, since they're sharing their electrons, they can have different ratios. So to tell the difference between each molecule, we place a prefix before its element name indicating the number of atoms present. So before, when we were doing ionic bonding, we just had to name the metal and the anion, if we remember that. So we named the cation and the anion. We changed the ending to IDE. For covalent compounds, it's a little bit more complex, and we're going to have to know these prefixes. Now, of course, you guys are virtual, which means you can pull up this as a reference when you need to. But as you practice these, you're going to memorize some of these prefixes, which will make it easier. So here are the prefixes. So these are the ones that we're going to use to help us name our covalent compounds. So 1 is mono, 2 is di, 3 is tri, 4 is tetra, 5 is penta, 6 is hexa, 7 is hepta, 8 is octa, 9 is nona, and 10 is deca. A lot of times we don't get into these upper numbers, but you could see them, so we do need to know. So here are the naming rules for our covalent compounds. When naming covalent compounds, the first element name is written with a prefix only when it's larger than 1, okay? So if it's got more than one atom, then you do include the prefix over here, okay? So let's say that there were 2 of them, you would say di, whatever element. 3 of them, tri, whatever element, the name of the element. However, if it's the first element and there's only one atom, you don't put the mono. So if it's the first element in the compound and there's only one of them, we don't put the mono, we just put the name of the compound. The second element always gets a prefix. So that second element, if there is one, then it does get that prefix mono. And then just like with ionic compounds, covalent names also end with IDE. Okay, so we're going to drop the ending and change it to IDE. So this is what it should look like. Prefix, name of the first element, prefix, name of the element, IDE. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these. And we're not going to do all of these. I am just going to choose a few. So here, the superscripts are going to tell us which prefixes we need, right? So here we have a 4 and we have a 5. So I know I'm going to need the prefixes that relate to 4 and 5. And actually, I'm going to go back really quick so we can see. So 4 is tetra. So we know we're going to have a tetra in there. And then 5 is penta. So we'll have penta. So if I were going to write this out, this first one, would be tetra, because there's 4 of the phosphorus. So we're going to say it's tetra. It's a little bit bigger. There we go. Tetra phosphorus, because that first one for us. Tetraphosphorus, and then the 5 is penta. So we'll say pentasulfide. Okay, so tetraphosphorus pentasulfide. That would be the name of P4S5. Tetra, so the tetra for the 4, the name of the first element, phosphorus, Then for the second part, the second element, we have its prefix, which is penta, because that's for 5. And then sulfide for the sulfur, and we drop the ending and change it to ide. Okay? So tetraphosphorus pentasulfide is the name of this covalent compound. Now let's do number 2. So here we have 1 oxygen. Now the prefix for 1 is mono. However, this oxygen is the first element. So we don't include the mono. We just say oxygen. Okay. And then there are 2 bromine. 2 is di, so we'll say dibromide. We're going to drop the INE off the bromine and change it to IDE. So oxygen dibromide tells us that is the formula, right? So 1 oxygen, and then di for the 2, and then bromine turns into bromide because that's the last element, okay? Let me see. Let's do 9 over here. And then this will be our last one for the naming, and then we'll do some of the formulas. So here we have chlorine and fluorine. These are both halogens. So our first one is chlorine. There's only 1 chlorine, but it's the first element, so we just say chlorine. And then there's 1 fluorine, but because it's the second element and there's 1 of them, it does get the prefix. So we'll say mono, and then of course we know that that's going to change to the monofluoride. So chlorine monofluoride, oxygen dibromide, tetraphosphorus pentasulfide. If you want to practice some of these on the screen and you want to double check and make sure they're correct, absolutely I can meet with you on Zoom, or you could always email me and I can let you know. We'll be doing some more of these in your assignment today, but I just wanted to do a few here while you're taking your notes. Okay, so there we have our naming. Now we have to be able to do the reverse, right? So we have to be able to look at the name of a covalent compound and figure out the formula. So let's take a look again, just a few of these. So our first one, we've got carbon dioxide here. So carbon is the first element and there's no prefix. So since it's the first element and there's no prefix to it, we assume there's only 1. So we're going to have 1 carbon. And then dioxide, di is 2. And then we know that oxide, that IDE has been changed from the oxygen. So we know there's going to be oxygen. And then there's 2 oxygen. Okay. And this would be a subscript. I don't have the ability to create a subscript with this particular annotation feature, but it would be CO2 and that 2 would be a subscript. Okay. Let's see. We can just do the second one. So here we have phosphorus pentachloride. So again, phosphorus pentachloride. We have another example here where there's no prefix for the phosphorus. So it's just going to be P, because remember potassium is K, phosphorus is P. And so there's no subscript because there's just 1. And then it's pentachloride. Penta is 5, and then chloride is chlorine. So we're going to have Cl for the chlorine, and his subscript would be 5. So PCl5 would be phosphorus pentachloride. And again, if you're not sure about the prefixes, just go a few slides back. You guys have access to the slides. Go a few slides back and use that table to help you. Okay? And let's do 26 as well. Let's do that as our last example. Here we have dinitrogen tetroxide. So dinitrogen tetroxide. Now dinitrogen, here we do have a prefix, and that's a di, so that's 2. So we know we're going to have 2 nitrogen, so it's going to be N2. And then again, oxide is oxygen, so we know our second element is going to be oxygen, and there's 4, so we're going to have a 4. So N2O4, okay? So again, if you wanted to do some more of these and double check yourself either on a Zoom meeting with me or through email, that's absolutely possible. Just know that today's lesson, the biggest things we have to be able to do, Number one, identify if a bond is covalent in the first place. So is it two nonmetals that are bonded together? Number two, be able to identify the formula if you're given the name, or be able to identify the name of the compound if you're given the formula, right? So first make sure it's covalent, and then you use your covalent naming rules. Because at this point, now that we know about ionic and covalent bonds, you'll be expected to be able to look at them all together and be able to determine what type of bond it is and how to name each one, okay? So that's it for today. And if you have any questions, let me know. And if not, I will catch you guys in our next lesson. Bye, guys.